The morning cacophony of Donovan Tower's ground-floor cafe buzzed with the static energy of a new day. Baristas skillfully called out orders, steam hissed rhythmically from the espresso machine, and the rich scent of roasted beans hung heavy in the air, a silent invitation. Into this vibrant hum stepped Rachel Donovan, 30 years old, CEO of the corporate empire that occupied the tower's uppermost floors. Her crisp white blouse and tailored gray pencil skirt spoke of efficiency, her every stride radiating an unmistakable urgency. Yet no one truly noticed her, not as a CEO, nor as anything more than another professional desperate for her morning caffeine fix. She approached the counter, deftly tapping her phone, while balancing a tablet and a neatly tucked folder under one arm. "One large latte with an extra shot, please," she requested, her voice polished, though a hint of distraction colored its tone. "That'll be $5.85, the barista replied, cheerfully. Rachel smoothly presented her card, sliding it into the reader. The small screen blinked. "Declined." Her brow furrowed in confusion. She tried again, but the result was the same. "Declined." A jolt of panic tightened in her chest. "Hold on," she murmured, her hand diving into her leather satchel, searching frantically through the side pocket, then the main compartment. Nothing. Her wallet wasn't there. She never forgot her wallet. Not ever. Until, apparently, today. "I'm so sorry," she said, a flush of embarrassment creeping up her neck. "I think I left my wallet in my office. Could you possibly hold this for just a second? I can run up and—" Her voice trailed off as the barista's cheerful expression thinned, her eyes flicking nervously to the rapidly growing line behind Rachel. Just as the silence stretched thin with mounting tension, a quiet, steady voice cut through the air. "It's just coffee. Happens to the best of us." Rachel turned, her gaze falling upon a man who had stepped forward from the side. He was tall, perhaps in his mid-30s, dressed simply in worn jeans and a navy polo shirt. A security badge clipped discreetly to his belt. His brown hair was short, neat, and his face held a calming, unpretentious composure. His name tag, barely visible, read, "Caleb." Before she could form a protest, Caleb raised his phone, tapping it against the contactless reader. A gentle chime confirmed the payment, and the barista visibly relaxed. "Thank you, sir," she said with renewed cheer. Caleb offered a small, reassuring nod, then turned to Rachel, extending the latte. "Here," he said simply. "No big deal." Rachel took the cup, still somewhat stunned. "Wait, you don't have to." "I know," he interjected with a shrug. "But if it were me, you'd do the same." There was something profoundly disarming about his tone. No pity, no performance, just a straightforward, quiet act of kindness. Rachel managed a faint smile. "Still," she began. "Thank you." "No need," Caleb interrupted again, offering a small, easy smile. As she adjusted her bag, the warm cup tilted precariously, and a few drops of hot latte splashed onto her pristine blouse. She winced. "Of course. Perfect," she muttered under her breath. Without a word, Caleb reached into his back pocket and produced a clean, folded napkin. He stepped closer, not too close, and gently dabbed at the stain near her collarbone. His touch was respectful, precise, like someone who intuitively understood boundaries. "There," he said, pulling back slightly. "Mostly gone." Rachel looked up at him, a flicker of something new in her eyes. He was already turning away, preparing to leave. "Wait," she called out. "What's your name?" He paused, glancing over his shoulder. "Caleb," he replied softly. Then, with an easy stride, he walked away, disappearing through the exit near the elevator bay. Rachel stood motionless, clutching the warm cup, the napkin still held in her hand. Around her, the line resumed its movement. Orders were shouted, and the rhythmic hiss of the espresso machine filled the air once more. Poured. But something had fundamentally changed within her. It was a small, simple gesture, yet profound. A man, a stranger who didn't recognize her title, her substantial salary, or her well-known face, and yet he had paid for her coffee, gently wiped her shirt, and departed without lingering for thanks or recognition. She looked down at the napkin still clutched in her hand, the faint coffee stain now drying on its edge. People were often kind to her when they knew who she was, when they anticipated something in return. But Caleb hadn't even asked for her name. Rachel took a long, thoughtful sip from her latte. It was still warm, still perfect. Then, with a slight, contemplative frown and a curious stirring in her chest, she turned and headed towards the elevators. Her first meeting of the day still awaited her, but now her thoughts were anchored elsewhere entirely. With a man named Caleb and a coffee, she knew she would never forget. The conference room on the 26th floor was a sanctuary of glass and hushed silence, broken only by the soft hum of the coffee machine in the corner and the rhythmic tap-tap of laptop keys. Rachel sat at the head of the long mahogany table, her sleeves meticulously rolled up. A neat stack of printed resumes laid out before her. Reviewing the short list for the new regional tech initiative was a personal decision, a battle she'd fought hard to win after years of relying too heavily on impersonal department filters and automated software. The stakes were undeniably high. Donovan Enterprises was poised to expand its digital division into 3 vibrant new cities, and this team would lay the very foundation of that growth. Rachel wasn't just seeking polished credentials. She wanted people with genuine grit. She scanned one resume, then another. Solid candidates, yes, but a subtle uniformity about them made her restless. Too many flawless lines, too many predictable buzzwords. She reached for the next folder, and then her hand paused mid-air. The name at the very top stopped her cold. Caleb Morgan. Her eyes narrowed. She recognized that name. She had just seen it, not in the accepted pile, but precisely in the rejection column. Reaching into the discard stack, she rifled through the papers until she found it. His resume had been marked with stark red ink. Gap in employment. Incomplete. Explanation. Discard. But now, seeing it again, she read more carefully. Former senior systems engineer, Halbert Technologies. Her heart gave a slight, unexpected lurch. Halbert was no joke. It was prestigious, highly selective. She scanned further down. 8 years of experience, several internal promotions. Then, a sharp, unsettling blank. A 3-year gap with no explanation beyond a vague personal leave. Rachel leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen against her knee. The Caleb she'd met at the cafe, quiet, steady, radiating a subtle warmth, hadn't looked like a man who couldn't hold a job. He had looked like someone who had chosen stillness over chaos. She rose, crossed the elegant room, and pulled up the digital application on the company portal. Attached to the application was a small, almost unassuming note in the additional comments section. It simply read, "Looking to re-enter the tech world at my own pace. I'm not looking for pity, just purpose." Rachel's throat tightened. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment, then began typing swiftly, searching through internal records, LinkedIn, public data, and there it was. An article from 4 years ago, buried deep within the local news archives. Tech exec loses family in tragic freeway crash, leaves company weeks later. She didn't need to read the full piece. The accompanying photo spoke volumes. Caleb, younger but undeniably recognizable, standing at a memorial site, a single white rose held delicately in his hand. Rachel leaned back, her breath shallow. She wasn't someone easily shaken, but something about the quiet dignity of his resume, the deliberate silence around that period, profoundly moved her. She looked back at the printed page. It felt like holding the tip of an iceberg, the vast, painful reality submerged beneath the surface. And someone in HR, had looked at that blank space and seen a flaw. Rachel, however, saw a fight. She picked up her pen and, with a decisive stroke, crossed out the red line. Then, next to his name, she wrote in bold black ink, "Priority review, direct interview with CEO." When her assistant returned with her coffee, Rachel didn't look up. "Emily," she said evenly, "I want you to pull the full HR notes on this one, Caleb Morgan, and set up a one-on-one meeting, no panel, just him and me." Emily blinked. He's one of the rejected ones." "Not anymore," Rachel replied without lifting her gaze. 2 hours later, back in her office, Rachel closed the door and stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling city below. The sun was just beginning to break through the morning haze, transforming the busy streets into miniature landscapes where people looked like toy figures rushing towards unknown goals. She thought of Caleb's words again, soft and simple. "If it were me, you'd do the same." But would she? Had she? How many worthy people had she overlooked because they didn't fit neatly into her prescribed boxes? She remembered the way he had stepped back after paying, giving her space. The gentle care with which he had dabbed the coffee from her blouse, never making it awkward. The quiet dignity with which he had walked away, expecting nothing, not even a thank you. And now here he was again, not in the building by accident, but on a list she had never truly looked at until today. A man who had once led teams of 50 engineers who had lost everything and, instead of collapsing, chose to rebuild with the tools he had left: dignity, silence, and a job that allowed him to breathe. Rachel looked back at her planner and circled the next Thursday afternoon. Below it, she wrote, "Interview, Caleb Morgan. Read him, not the resume." The late afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows of Rachel Donovan's corner office, casting a golden hue on the polished glass table where 2 mugs of coffee sat, one untouched, one cooling. Caleb Morgan stood by the door, his hands uncertainly at his sides. He looked slightly out of place in the sleek modern room, his security uniform clean but simple, his posture polite yet guarded. Rachel gestured towards the seat directly across from her. "Please have a seat." He obeyed quietly, but his eyes, calm and alert like a man accustomed to uncertainty, searched hers. "I imagine you're wondering why I asked you here," Rachel began, clasping her hands lightly on the table. Caleb offered a small, knowing smile. "You mean besides the obvious coffee, incident?" She laughed once, a soft, rare sound, and nodded. "Among other things." She reached for a folder on her desk, opening it slowly. "Caleb Morgan, former senior systems engineer, 8 years at Halbert Technologies, multiple commendations. Then 3 years, with no entries, and now a part-time building security role. You didn't include any of that in your cover letter." He didn't flinch. "I didn't think it would matter. Most people stopped reading after the gap." Rachel tilted her head. "And if they hadn't? If someone had read to the end?" He hesitated, then shrugged lightly. "They'd see someone rebuilding on his own terms." She studied him for a long moment. You're overqualified for any of the roles we posted. You know that. Yes, he said simply. So why apply for something entry-level? Why not wait for the executive doors to open again? His voice was quiet but unwavering. Because I didn't want pity, I wanted purpose. A fresh start that I earned, not one handed to me out of guilt or curiosity. Rachel nodded slowly. There was something about the stillness in him. Unmoving. Steady. It wasn't pride. It wasn't arrogance. It was clarity. She looked down at the folder, then back at him. Do you know what surprised me the most? She asked. He shook his head. That morning, when you paid for my coffee, you didn't linger. You didn't ask for anything. You didn't even let me thank you. He smiled just a little. It didn't feel like something I needed thanks for. But it was, she said softly. Not just the coffee, but how you did it. You saw me just as a person in a moment of need. Not a CEO, not a stranger to impress. Caleb said nothing, but his expression softened, a subtle vulnerability emerging. Rachel reached into her drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. She slid it across the table. This isn't because of the coffee, she said, and it's not out of obligation. He picked up the envelope and opened it. Inside was a formal offer letter, not for a junior role, but for lead systems consultant on the new digital infrastructure project, one of the company's most ambitious undertakings in years. I read your file, Rachel continued, her voice low, but more importantly, I listened, and I saw what most people didn't. Caleb looked at her, his eyes steady. Yet there was something fragile in them now, like the weight of being truly seen after a long time spent in shadow. I'm not doing this because I owe you, she said firmly. I'm doing this because I need someone like you. A long silence passed between them. Finally, Caleb nodded once, then carefully placed the envelope back on the table. I'll accept, he said, but on one condition. Rachel raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement in her gaze. And what's that? He smiled gently. You let me pay for the next coffee. She laughed. Deal. The elevator dinged softly as Caleb stepped onto the 22nd floor of Donovan Tower, the heart of the Executive and Strategy Division. This floor looked nothing like the bustling lobby where he had stood months ago as a part-time security guard. Here, the lighting was warmer, the air subtly scented with cedar and lemon, and the walls were lined with sleek, digital displays showcasing real-time data feeds and project dashboards. His ID badge now read Technical Strategy Consultant. He touched it absently, still not entirely used to the title. From the moment he stepped into the open office space, he felt the stares. Some were curious, others cautious, a few clearly skeptical. Later that morning, by the coffee station, he overheard two junior analysts whispering just loud enough. That's guy, the security guard, heard the CEO hired him personally. Yeah, the other murmured. Went from opening doors to running projects. Must have made a hell of a cup of coffee. Caleb didn't flinch. He'd been through worse, but it still stung. His first meetings were quiet. He was respectful, observant, saying little unless directly asked. But in that silence, he was learning about the systems, the glaring gaps, the hidden inefficiencies no one else had addressed, not because they didn't care, but because they didn't see them with his unique clarity. That evening, as he packed up to leave, an email appeared in his inbox, the subject line stark and simple. Just in case. It was from Rachel Donovan. Attached was a private link to the company's internal architecture blueprint and a confidential access pass to the latest infrastructure revision logs. No note, no comment, just precisely what he needed. Caleb smiled quietly to himself. Each day after he came in early, left late. He asked questions, sometimes to no one in particular, reviewing lines of code and system maps with the precision of someone who had built them from the inside out. Slowly, one by one, the team began to listen. And Rachel? She didn't hover. She never sat in his meetings or micromanaged his work, but every so often he'd find small, subtle gestures. An extra whiteboard installed beside his desk, a new data model license quietly added to his account. She was watching quietly, just as he had once watched her from behind a building's entrance, holding doors open while holding back his own past. The true turning point came during the third week. It was a Monday morning review session. The room was packed with strategists, project leads, and IT heads. Caleb stood at the screen, dressed in a sharp navy blazer over a simple shirt. No tie. He cleared his throat once. "I reviewed our current digital infrastructure," he stated, pulling up a detailed schematic, "and I found 3 redundancies across data sync channels that are costing us an estimated $420,000 annually." A few heads lifted around the room. He clicked again. "With a layered consolidation strategy and smart caching," he pointed to the model on the screen, "we could reduce that by 85% within 6 months. Silence followed. Then murmurs, then real questions. Technical, sharp, pressing. Caleb answered each one clearly, confidently, like a man who hadn't just worn a badge, but had truly carried the weight of real responsibility. When the session ended, the room was still processing the information. Rachel, who had sat quietly at the back the entire time, rose. She walked forward slowly, her heels soft against the plush carpet. Then, with a calm, understated smile, she looked around the room and said simply, "I read his file. I read between the lines." She paused, then, her gaze shifting warmly to Caleb, she added, "And today he just read the room. I chose right." Applause started. Not thunderous, but genuine, a ripple of acknowledgement spreading through the room. Caleb didn't smile, not right away. He only nodded and quietly packed up his notes. But inside, something profound shifted. The floor didn't feel so high up anymore, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was borrowing space. He was building something of his own. The clock on the wall ticked past 9:45 p.m. Most of Donovan Tower had gone dark, the city lights outside casting long, ethereal reflections against the towering windows. But on the 22nd floor, 2 lights still burned. One in Rachel's corner office, and the other at the far end, where Caleb worked, his screen aglow with cascading lines of code. Rachel had been staring at the same financial report for 20 minutes, her temples throbbing. Her blazer hung over the back of her chair, heels kicked off beneath her desk. Her hair, usually immaculate, was beginning to fall loose from its elegant twist. It had been a brutal day. An unexpected budget cut in a subsidiary, a tense call with investors, and 3 back-to-back meetings that left no room to breathe. She barely noticed Caleb leave his seat until she heard the quiet knock on her glass door. Looking up, she saw no one, but on the edge of her desk sat a white ceramic mug, steam curling gently from its surface. Chamomile, her favorite. Next to it, a small folded note, written in firm, unhurried handwriting. "You look tired. The world can wait." She stared at it for a long moment, something tightening in her chest. No one had said anything like that to her in years. Everyone assumed she could handle anything because she always had, because she never showed cracks, because when you were the boss, kindness was often traded for expectation. Rachel leaned back in her chair, her hands cradling the warm mug. She looked towards the far end of the floor, but Caleb's light was off now. He had left without a word. She should have expected that. The next morning brought a storm, not of weather, but of corporate chaos. A leaked internal memo had sparked confusion among regional teams. The media caught wind. There was speculation, panic, and in the emergency meeting that followed, Rachel found herself in the center of a firing squad. How could this happen on your watch? We should have had better controls. Is leadership even aligned? The questions came fast, pointed, veiled in professional tones but laced with accusation. Rachel sat at the head of the table, spine straight, jaw tight, absorbing each word without flinching, but her knuckles whitened around the pen in her hand. Then Caleb spoke. He hadn't planned to, but something about the way Rachel's eyes had flickered just once, a barely visible tremor, made him move. "With respect," he said, his voice calm but clear, "if we are going to question leadership, let's be accurate. Rachel wasn't the leak. She wasn't the bottleneck, and she sure as hell wasn't the one who failed to flag the outdated communications protocol. That was my team, and I own that." Silence. Caleb continued, his voice unwavering. "But while you're pointing fingers, she's been in this office at midnight cleaning up the mess. So unless anyone here has logged more hours this week than she has, I suggest we direct our attention to fixing, not blaming." A beat. Then Rachel spoke, her voice steady but softer than usual. "Thank you, Caleb." The meeting continued, less hostile now, more focused. When it ended, Rachel lingered behind, stacking papers in silence. Caleb stood by the door, waiting. When she finally looked up, her expression had changed. Less guarded, warmer. "Why did you do that?" she asked quietly. "Because you were alone," he said simply. "And I know what that feels like." She crossed her arms, not in defense, but in something closer to vulnerability. "You really believe that's enough? Just showing up?" Caleb nodded. "It's where everything starts." For the first time, Rachel didn't have a sharp reply. She just looked at him, truly looked, and realized that somehow, in this whirlwind of corporate warfare, he had found a way to reach her. Not through power, not through strategy, but through stillness, through seeing. Later that night, she found herself rereading the note he'd left. "You look tired. The world can wait." And for the first time, maybe it could. The grand ballroom of Donovan Corp's 10-year anniversary gala glowed under the warm embrace of crystal chandeliers. The room was a vibrant tapestry of executives, investors, media, and smiling colleagues. Toasts were raised to a decade of innovation and expansion. A string quartet performed softly near the raised dais. The atmosphere was polished, celebratory, a carefully orchestrated symphony of success. Yet Rachel Donovan felt a strange blend of fierce pride and deep exhaustion. She had meticulously organized every detail, yet this night felt almost unreal to her. She wore a floor-length midnight blue gown, its deep-cut back revealing just a touch of skin, the fabric shimmering gracefully as she moved under the soft lights. Her blonde hair cascaded in loose waves, her makeup poised, confident, elegant. But she carried the undeniable weight of the entire evening on her shoulders. Caleb Morgan stood by the service doors, watching. He was in a classic tuxedo, no frilly accessories, no flashy cufflinks, just clean, understated, genuine. He had arrived early to assist Rachel with gala details, ensuring stage lighting was soft, checking microphones, and quietly regrouping staff. He had slipped away earlier to change into formal wear, but his mind remained entirely focused on her. Earlier in the evening, he had noticed her shiver as she greeted guests near the north window, where drafts snaked in from the open balcony. With discreet timing, he had draped a soft, navy cashmere wrap over her shoulders before she even saw him. His fingers had brushed hers briefly as he arranged the folds. She had felt it, even then. Now, as the final presentation concluded and the quartet ended on a lingering chord, the assembled crowd began to flow towards the dining area. Glasses clinked, laughter spread. Rachel smiled, thanked people, accepted compliments. But her thoughts were elsewhere, drawn by an unspoken expectation. A hush fell over the room. The fireworks were scheduled. Rachel stepped out onto the southwest terrace, adjusting the cashmere wrap around her slender shoulders, pausing as the warm night air enveloped her. Caleb followed a few steps behind. The sky exploded with color. First a fiery red, then an electric blue, followed by a cascading shower of gold. Each burst lit their faces, vibrant, bright, the dazzling reflections dancing in her eyes. Caleb watched her watch them. She turned slightly, and a soft, genuine smile flickered across her lips. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice a hushed whisper. "It is," he agreed. They stood side by side, silent, bathed in the fleeting glow. She lifted a brow, almost imperceptibly. He took a slow breath. "You're cold." She looked at him. He held out his free hand. Without hesitation, she placed both of hers into his. They watched the next bursts together. Two figures silhouetted against the brilliant spectacle. The explosions faded into a soft afterglow, leaving the night sky speckled with lingering sparks. Rachel's gaze shifted back to him. "Why, are you always noticing the little things?" she asked, her voice caught between wonder and vulnerability. He considered as the fireworks finally ceased and the night air grew gentle around them. "Because I know what it's like when no one notices." That phrase landed like a confession, striking a chord deep within her. She glanced down at their joined hands. His palm was warm, steady, his thumb brushing tenderly across her fingers. She looked back at the vast expanse of the sky, then back at him. "Thank you," she whispered, the words barely audible. He squeezed her hand gently. "Always." They stayed like that, holding hands, not yet touching lips, but undeniably connected. Two people whose separate worlds had slowly, irrevocably merged beyond roles and resumes. Behind them, applause rose from the ballroom, welcoming the guests back inside. They lingered a few more moments, neither wanting to rush back into the realm of small talk. Now came the true crescendo, not of fireworks, but of truth. "Rachel," Caleb began, his voice low, filled with quiet conviction. She looked up at his profile, softly lit by starlight. "I can't promise it will always be perfect," he said, "but I promise I'll keep noticing." She leaned in, a subtle movement towards him. The wrap fell, revealing more of her shoulder, but she shivered less than before. Their eyes met, no words needed, a silent understanding passing between them. Then he stepped closer, gently tilting her chin up. The office was quieter than usual. It was past 7 p.m., and most of the floor was dark except for a lone corner cubicle where soft typing could still be heard. Caleb passed by on his way to retrieve a forgotten folder, but something in the stillness made him stop. Inside the cubicle sat Mia, one of the youngest members of the analytics team. Her face was pale, her eyes red, from what she thought were unnoticed tears. Caleb leaned gently against the edge of the cubicle and spoke softly. "You okay?" She startled, quickly wiping her cheeks. "Yeah. Yes, It's nothing." Caleb didn't press. He pulled up a chair across from her and simply waited. After a few moments, she said quietly, "I messed up a report. Bad. It's going to affect next week's client presentation. I don't know if I belong here." Caleb nodded slowly. You think the rest of us never mess up? She blinked, surprised. But you're calm. You always seem to have it together. I used to be an engineer, he said, a faint smile touching his lips. Once, I shipped a product update that crashed an entire platform for 3 days. I thought I'd never get another chance. What happened? Mia asked, her voice hushed. He smiled slightly. Someone sat down across from me and said, "You're allowed to fail. You're not allowed to give up." So, I didn't. Mia exhaled, some of the tension in her shoulders easing. Redo the report, he added gently. If you want, I'll check it with you. You're not alone in this. From across the glass panel, Rachel had been walking down the corridor and paused. She saw the scene. Caleb's patient presence, the subtle shift in Mia's body from defeat to renewed steadiness. It wasn't grand, but it was leadership. Quiet, human, real. Later, as they walked out of the building together, Rachel finally broke the comfortable silence. You make me rethink how I lead. He looked at her, his expression questioning. She continued. All this time, I thought leadership was about being ahead of everyone. But maybe it's more about walking alongside. Caleb smiled, his hands in his coat pockets. Leadership doesn't start with power. It starts with presence. They reached the curb. Her car was still in the shop, and he offered her a ride home again. She agreed. Inside the car, the city lights flickered past the windows. Rachel leaned her head back against the seat, letting out a quiet sigh. You're right, she said. You don't have to say much to change something for someone. He glanced at her. Neither do you. She turned to him, her lips curving into a soft smile. You always notice more than people think you do. I used to miss things, he said, his voice soft. Now, I try not to. The car grew quiet again, a gentle, comfortable stillness. Soft instrumental music played low from the speakers. As the traffic slowed, Rachel's eyes began to close. The accumulated fatigue of the week, the emotional weight of everything, finally settled upon her. She didn't mean to fall asleep, but within minutes her breathing evened, her head tilting slightly to one side, blonde hair brushing her cheek. Caleb noticed. At the next red light, he turned slightly toward her. A few delicate strands of her hair had caught at the corner of her lips. Carefully, without a sound, he lifted a hand, pausing just inches away. He hesitated. Something deep within him stirred, not the fleeting rush of infatuation, but something older, warmer, a profound sense of recognition, of having found something he thought he had lost for good. As his fingers gently brushed the hair away from her face, Rachel stirred. Her eyes fluttered open for a second. Neither of them moved. Her gaze met his. His hand still hovered near her cheek. He began, pulling back quickly. Sorry. Your hair. Her face flushed, but her eyes didn't leave his. It's okay. They didn't say anything more, but the air between them shifted, charged with a new, undeniable awareness taking root. When they reached her building, he stepped out and opened her door, as always. She exited slowly, turning back to him with a look softer than usual, a vulnerability that had only recently begun to show. Thank you, she said, her voice a whisper. For tonight, for earlier, for seeing people. His answer was a small, understanding nod. As she walked up the stairs, she glanced back once. He was still standing there, hands in his coat pockets, watching her, not with possession, but quiet regard. Inside her apartment, Rachel leaned against the door for a moment, pressing a hand to her chest. It wasn't just gratitude. It was the beginning of something else. something no MBA program, no leadership seminar, no board meeting had ever taught her. She smiled because some lessons, the ones that truly matter, can only be learned from someone who has lived them. The auditorium was filled with soft, appreciative applause. As Rachel stepped onto the stage, a large screen behind her displayed the elegant logo of Donovan Corp., along with the title of the groundbreaking program she had championed over the past year. The Second Door, Hiring Without Bias. It had become more than a pilot idea. It had ignited a national conversation. Rachel wore a navy blue pantsuit, simple yet exuding strength. Her hair was pinned back, her voice calm and assured as she addressed the eager crowd. "I stand here, not just as a CEO," she began, her gaze sweeping across the faces before her, "but as someone who once got a second look, who realized that sometimes the most valuable resumes are the ones we almost miss. This initiative isn't about charity. It's about recognizing immense value in quiet places, in quiet people." Applause erupted again, cameras flashing, capturing the moment. But while her name was printed in bold on the certificate she received, while her photo would be featured in industry publications the following week, Rachel's eyes searched the back of the room. Past the lights, past the applause, Caleb stood near the exit. Not on stage, not in the spotlight, just as he preferred. He caught her gaze. She gave him a small, knowing nod. Later, as the crowd dispersed and the press moved on to other stories, Rachel slipped out a side door and found him waiting near the lobby's wide glass windows. "You stood back," she observed, a gentle smile playing on her lips. "I always do," he replied with a soft smile of his own. She stepped closer, a warmth in her eyes. "You're the reason I stood up there tonight?" He shook his head slightly, a quiet denial. "You were always going to stand up there." Rachel looked down for a moment, then gently, instinctively took his hand. "I don't love you because you were kind to me when my card got declined," she said, her voice low and earnest. "I love you because you're kind when no one's watching." His fingers curled around hers, instinctively. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Outside, the city buzzed as it always did, a symphony of urban life. But, for them, the night held a stillness they both understood, a shared quiet that spoke volumes. Later, they found themselves back at the very same coffee shop where it had all begun. The rain had stopped, but the sidewalk was still wet, reflecting the golden glow from the windows inside. They ordered 2 coffees, hers with oat milk, his black. The barista smiled, recognizing them vaguely from that article about the Donovan CEO. Rachel reached into her purse and pulled out her card, holding it up with a playful smirk. "What if it gets declined again?" Caleb leaned slightly forward, his voice low, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "Then I'll just scan mine again," he said. "Some habits are hard to break." She handed over her card. The machine beeped. "Approved." They both laughed, a warm, shared sound. But then she grew quiet, looking down at her coffee, then back up at him. "You know what I think about sometimes?" she asked, her voice soft. "What if that day you hadn't been in line behind me? What if you had looked away?" Caleb leaned back, thoughtful. "I think we still would have met, just somewhere else. Kindness doesn't need timing. It just needs 2 people willing to see each other." She nodded, a gentle understanding in her eyes. Outside, a soft breeze rustled. Inside, the warmth of the coffee, the low hum of soft music, the quiet weight of a year full of change and profound choices settled around them. Rachel reached across the table and rested her hand over his. "This," she said, her voice almost a whisper, "was never just about a coffee." "No," Caleb said, his thumb brushing gently against hers. "It was about someone seeing someone and choosing to stay." The machine behind the counter dinged again, signaling another order ready. But for Rachel and Caleb, their beginning had already been brewed and served, quietly, kindly, and just the way they needed. And the future? Well, it tasted a lot like coffee and courage.